Well, welcome everyone. I'm Senator David Waters and calling into session the meeting of the Electronic Vehicle Infrastructure Commission. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting that we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of this committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to executive order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access contemporaneously watch or listen to the meeting on Zoom and YouTube, etc., and via phone by the following directions and links provided in the general court website. We have provided public notice and necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with the access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@ledge.state.nh.us. That's remotesenate@ledge.state.nh.us, or call 603-271-3043. And that's 603-271-3043. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. So I will begin by noting that I'm Senator David Waters and I am alone in the room in Dover, and I will just go across my screen. Becky?
That's Becky Oler with the Department of Environmental Services, and I am alone in my house in Dover.
Thank you. And Dave?
Good afternoon, Senator. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name's David Rodriguez from New Hampshire DOT, and I am alone in my office. Thank you.
And Carlton?
Carlton Simpson. I am with Unitil. I am in Hampton, and I am alone.
And Kevin?
Kevin Bond, Eversource Energy. I'm alone in my home.
Richard? Can you hear me? Director Bailey?
Rick Bailey, Department of Safety, in my office on Haven Drive.
Peter?
Good afternoon. This is Pete King with Geosyntec Consultants representing business and industry. I'm in Mount Vernon at my home and I'm alone. Thanks.
And Gary?
Gary LeMay with Drive Electric NH and NHEC. I am at my house in Meredith, but my wife is upstairs, but I'm in the room alone.
Okay. And is that George on the phone, Representative Sykes, or someone else?
This is Matthew Melo with OSI. I am alone in my vehicle.
Well, hi, Matt, and thank you. And I see that Kevin Miller is connecting. Are you connected, Kevin? Want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Waters. Kevin Miller on behalf of electric vehicle charging manufacturers with ChargePoint.
Well, thank you all. And as others join in, I will ask them to identify themselves. And thanks again to Becky for preparing the meeting materials. We've done our introductions, and I think I'll hold off on an introduction of public attendees until we get to the public comment period. So our first item of business is to review and approve the minutes from 8/24/20, and I would entertain a motion to approve.
Senator Waters, I'll make that motion. Gary LeMay.
And a second.
David Rodrigue will second.
Thank you very much. And Becky notes that there will be some further edits and formatting needed in the document, which will be made after we have approved them with that proviso. Let me welcome Representative Smith. And Representative, if you can hear me, want to unmute and just introduce yourself.
Representative Steve Smith, House Transportation Committee.
Thank you so much, Representative Smith. So are there any additions or corrections or comments on the minutes? And so hearing none, maybe Becky, could you read the roll on the, or should I do that? What's easier for you for the vote?
Probably easier for me. That way I can record.
Thank you.
So Senator Waters,
Yes.
Representative Sykes. Oh, he's not here yet. Okay. Representative Smith,
Yes.
Matt Mayu,
Yes.
Richard Bailey,
Yes.
Kevin Bowen,
Yes.
Peter King,
Yes.
Gary LeMay,
Yes.
Kevin Miller. Kevin Miller,
Sorry, is that on a motion to approve the minutes? Apologies.
yes,
Aye.
thank you. Dave Rodrigue,
Yes.
I vote yes. Dan Bennett, who is not here, and Carlton
Excuse
Simpson.
me, Becky, Dan says he's on the call, but Alan, I don't see him appearing before. I had a message from Dan Bennett that he's on the call. So maybe he's in the public area. Oh, you're muted, Alan.
Sorry, I think this.
I think he just popped up. So Dan, if you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and if you want to vote in the minutes, go right ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dan from the Auto Dealers Association. I'm on the road traveling in my car by myself, so that's why I'm calling in this way.
Thank you. And are you a yes on the minutes, Dan?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Becky, you may continue the roll.
Okay.
And
the
she
last-
read my name, Carlton Simpson. I vote yes.
Okay, and that's it.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And so where we're at today is that we just have a couple of meetings left, and we will have this meeting for discussion of the final report and recommendations to be placed in that. And then we'll have our meeting in October to approve our final report, because we do go out of business after that. And, we had some discussion in the last meeting, and I've had some discussion with Becky Oler yesterday about how to proceed. And what we thought made sense is that the report, in the body of the report, will essentially be a review by way of the minutes and some other documents of what we have done on the commission. In that way, it will resemble and then build upon the annual report that we did last year. And it will include the materials that we heard from, who we heard from, links to those, and so on. And then there will be a kind of a preface, that executive summary, and an executive summary of the recommendations. And then there will be a recommendations session. And we thought it made sense to divide the recommendation session up into legislation, state budget, and then action by state government agencies. So that, we will have some discussion of each of these today, but it was also felt that maybe if we were sent the draft to the commission members of the summary of the meetings and so on, that people could go through that and kind of have in front of them all the, really, we've done great work and we've done a lot of work. If they had that before them, that they might then their memory be refreshed. They might have some new ideas about what things we should be recommending, and that those could be directed to my aide, Jennifer Gallagher, from whom you received the meeting notices and so forth. And she could assemble those, and then Becky and I can work between this meeting and next meeting to bring those all into the report. And so we would then be able to discuss those and see which we as a group by vote or by consensus do want to include in the final report. Kind of related to this, and it's number 5, but I think basically we might as well mention now, is that we did talk last time about how the Transportation Council would be the appropriate body to take on continuing discussion and report and receive reports on this work in the future, and that we might offer in our final report some directions to the Transportation Council of what we think that it could do in this area moving forward. That I just wanted to sketch that out, and I think in a way it's just a piece of information here that might help set the context for some of our recommendations as well, is that I wondered if we could at this point have a brief review, Becky, from you and perhaps from Matt as well, about the CMAQ funding announcement, and also just very briefly where we are on the fast charge RFP and the level 2.
Sure, I'll start with the CMAQ funding. It's sort of a combination of federal funding and the Volkswagen funding. The CMAQ program is run by New Hampshire DOT through a competitive process. And when the solicitation came out, we approached OSI and said, we've got this opportunity for federal dollars to be, but we need match. And so we agreed, and I don't have the numbers. Tim White's on the phone. He may have the exact numbers, but I think we were looking at a total project of about $280,000 ballpark. And we're proposing to put in 2 to 3 level 2 dual head level 2 chargers at 29 Hazen Drive, which is where where DES resides. It's also the Department of Health and Human Services. And we've got the DMV on one side and the Department of Safety on the other side, and DOT just down the street. So, Hazen Drive has got a huge number of state employees looking to install charging there that would be available as workplace charging during the day. And then we'll try to locate them in a way that sort of on the other side of the strip between the 2 parking lots is where we keep our state vehicles. And so we would use them for recharging, hopefully, some state electric vehicles overnight. The other Concord location that has been proposed is the Public Utilities Commission. They would like to put, I believe we're talking about 4 parking spaces, so 2 dual head level 2 chargers in the front of their building that they would use primarily for visitor parking, because they are the electric, where all the electric utilities go. They do have actually a number of electric vehicles that come there. Right now, their state staff is not allowed to park in the front parking lot, but they would make some exceptions so that during any active charging period, staff could actually use them for charging as well. And then the third location that we proposed would also be on state-owned property. And no decisions have been made, but it would be in the Notch area, either at the Flume or at Cannon ski area. And we'll be working with our other state agencies to make some final decisions on that. But DOT has selected that as a project. I don't know exactly where we are in the process of getting any agreements finalized. To the best of my knowledge, we haven't seen any draft agreements, so we're still a little ways away from being able to get that project out the door. Matt, do you want to do a VW update, or do you want me to just keep going?
So I would apologize that I do not have more of an update. As I think members of this commission know, I have been detailed to the governor's office to assist with the Gopher economic recovery and relief efforts. So I have not had much time on the day-to-day level. But Becky, if you have anything material, please feel free to share that.
I will say that unfortunately, we really don't have much change from when we met last time. Again, we're working on the proposals that we received for putting level 2 charging in the Green Street parking lot, developing some requests for additional information from some of the applicants. And we had a little bit of a discussion at the last meeting as to whether or not, at this point, going back out with the fast charger is, before we know whether or not there's going to be an extension of the federal tax credits, is the way to go. There seem to be differing opinions on that. But again, we are in a position where we are simply, it's a matter of having the staff people available and the time to do it. It's not a matter of not wanting to get this done. It's just being shorthanded and not enough hours in the day to get this moving as fast as we might all hope. So I guess that's the long way of saying that there's not much of an update on the fast charger at this point.
May I ask of Becky and Matt, do you think there's any change in this status is likely before our final meeting?
I do not know. I don't see it that it would be feasible between now and this time next month to get an RFP out the door.
Okay, well, I just think that'll flavor our recommendations in some ways about what we're saying to the Transportation Council, and also our appraisal of that process in our recommendations going forward as well. So let me open it up to the commission members, just if you have comments on the good news about CMAQ and where we are on the others. If there are any comments on that, and anybody want to chime in?
Chairman Waters, this is David Rodriguez from DOT. I wonder if I could ask if there's any information available on why the RFP was not awarded.
None of the proposals that were submitted were complete. Basically, none of them met the minimum criteria. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that we had patterned the initial RFP on what we saw in the state of Maine, where we asked for a single owner operator for multiple locations. And as we heard very clearly during the listening sessions, that's not going to work well in New Hampshire. And so really, some of the proposals didn't, the minimum criteria was that you submit a proposal that hit all of the spots all of the corridors that we had put in there. And basically none of them were able to do that.
It does seem that the listening sessions around that did provide not only that, but some other good and valuable advice that was going into the revision of the RFP. So I do suspect that when there is a chance to get it out, I think we'll have more success. I don't think that's really going to be a problem next go round. And as Becky has often said, it's best to do it right. It's too bad it takes so long, and too bad about COVID, but here we are. Any other comments on this report, or shall we move on to the?
This is Gary LeMay. I just got one question. I believe the state has the money from VW already. Is that true or not?
No, the trust, the VW trust is holding the funds where, by the way, that money is earning interest. It's not just sitting there doing nothing. It is earning interest, which accrues to the state's account. So the funding, the only funding that at this point has come out in advance is funds that we are using to match our federal Diesel Emission Reduction Act fund. I believe I've talked about that before, that we take that to match if we match the federal funds 100%, we get a 50% federal bonus. So that seemed like an easy way to stretch those dollars. That funding does come out in advance and goes into a DES account where it is dedicated to the DERA program, or what we call our state clean diesel program. And but other than that, the funding is all done on a reimbursement basis. I believe that's the only pot of money that has come out sort of in advance of a project being accepted and proposed and completed.
Okay, yeah, I just was curious if we're sitting on the money. I would hope the interest would go towards, the 4.5 million for EV chargers. Again, what is it, a 0.2% or 0.5% or 1%? But at least if it goes in there, it's doing something. So thank you.
Yeah.
Any other?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
So I guess I have a question or a comment. Is our report going to recommend to both the legislature, but also the Transportation Council that, and I can appreciate Becky's, the resource issue and the time that they have to put to it, but that they continue to stay focused on the DC fast charging infrastructure RFP process, even if it takes different versions and different modifications, because that's what this money is for, or this pot is EV infrastructure. And so are we going to have a strong recommendation or something that points to that?
Well, it looks like we've just segued into that conversation, and I know that Becky's going to be taking notes on it, and I think we're hearing that should be a strong recommendation, and thank you for that. So let's turn to that, and we'll go through, and again, these obviously, these kind of buckets of recommendations overlap. But let's start with legislation, and what given what we've learned, what we've been through, and all the information that we have received, legislation is a venue for us to set goals, set policy, and so forth. So why don't we open it up to that, and what do people think we need to do?
Senator Waters, this is Gary LeMay. I think there ought to be some legislation that definitely some amount of money needs to be allocated. Call it $500,000, call it 200,000, I don't care. But level 2 charging to be administered by the available to local entities with minimal strings. I mean, I understand about trying to do it right and do it once, but again, I want to do something. I want to see something done. So I'd like to see legislation to get some money out there, and perhaps even, maybe we need to get a non-public or a non-state entity to administer this. I certainly don't know about all utilities, but I mean, utilities do rebates. I know that some are hesitant because their overheads are pretty high to administer things like that. But I definitely, I guess going along with what Dan said, I don't want to just spend 2 years doing this and say, la-di-da, see you later. We did nothing, and we did a lot of education. Let me dance a little bit, but we didn't get any charges out there. And whether it's some of us on that transportation committee, or maybe it's an ad hoc committee, something to keep this moving, because I guess I do feel pretty disappointed we didn't get one charger in the ground. And I know people are working on it, but something.
Thank you for that. Excellent, excellent suggestions. Some others, and let me just say, this is an opportunity for us to get everything out that anybody's, even thinking or dreaming of, because we will have an opportunity to really sift through these in the next meeting and decide what we want to make an official recommendation. So I think the more that is out here, the better. So other thoughts?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So I just wanted to second Gary's point and point to a potential way to look at that flexibly. I think the idea that he brought up of having a sort of rebate focused approach could help to reduce some of the overhead challenges and administrative burden that comes along with a centrally administered grant RFP. So I think that suggestion is very interesting. Lots of different entities could pursue that approach. So if there's any concern about whether that approach is achievable, having clear identification that approach can be taken could be useful. But then putting a pin in the financial incentives briefly, harkening back to that long session where we had breakout groups, I think at the very least, if we could refer back to that, I don't want to rattle off all of the ideas that were part of those discussions, but we hit on things like electric vehicle requirements and construction codes or energy codes. There's a lot of sort of in the weeds pieces that could fit in well here that I'm sure you're already thinking of, but I just want to make sure that we consider those ranges of ideas and policy proposals.
Well, thank you. And as I suggested earlier, I hope people will go back through those. And, Kevin, if, things like that, please send an email to Jennifer Gallagher so that we make sure that we don't lose those. A question I kind of had about this is that, Gary was mentioning rebates and so on and so forth. And do we want to make a recommendation relating to what utilities can recover in rates, or through inclusion of EV charging rebates in the system's benefits charge package, or things like that? So, I mean, that's another area of legislation that could affect what the utilities can do, and then basically who pays for it, because if we start doing that, it's all ratepayers who pony up for it, and to a degree, but there we are. So I didn't know what anybody thought about recommendations of legislation in that direction.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Chair, was that sort of in reference to the Make Ready proposal that we'd heard outlined previously, or would that be sort of broader and not specific to that proposal?
Well, I'm thinking yes to that, but much broader. I mean, I see what's being done in the other states. So, we don't have to be down to the absolute brass tacks on each one of these recommendations. We can recommend an area that ought to be considered in legislation.
From Unitil's perspective, we definitely want to see more charging available in the state. And, we understand that there are other programs in other states, and that might be something that would be certainly worth considering in future legislation.
I think if we make a recommendation, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Becky.
Well, I'm just thinking if we're going to make a recommendation on that, it would be good to probably work with the maybe a group of utility folks and maybe some PUC folks could put their heads together to come up with some appropriate language, because there's an awful lot being done in rate cases and other dockets before the PUC right now. So it would just be sort of we'd want to make sure that we're coordinating with what's already happening.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I just, my hesitation to comment isn't because I don't have strong opinions. I just want to be careful of all the things that are going on currently in open dockets. And be mindful of that before I make any strong comment one way or the other. But obviously, happy to discuss what all the options mean offline. I certainly Make Ready is a pathway that helps site hosts take on EV infrastructure, which is needed. So, but yeah, because there's so much going on, I just don't want to make my comments part of a recommendation right now without some other internal discussions.
Well, thank you, Kevin. And, you know, the recommendations for legislation, again, I don't expect that we're going to say exactly this is what should be done. If there's an area like this, which you said should be considered, then what it would involve is some legislator getting together, as Becky suggested, with the interested party and seeing, can a bill be crafted around this and what would it do? And that's the, you know, I mean, there's the filing period in December. But this is something that, you know, if it's not done this year, it might be the next year. But it's just, you know, these commission reports really have a way of living on and provide information for people for years ahead to revisit and decide whether it's now time for legislation on this, that, or the other thing. One thing I have a couple I'd like to just mention. You know, a lot of activity around the country. You know, people have heard of what California did in saying no sales of gas-powered vehicles, basic fossil fuel-powered vehicles after 2035. Vermont, Connecticut, and 13 other states have signed on to a memorandum of understanding that is going to move the light-duty and medium-duty heavy trucks to ZEV. By, I'm trying to remember, is that 2035 or 2040 or something? There is continuing activity around the transportation climate initiative. So, you know, I just, these are areas where, you know, most of the states around us and a lot of the northeastern states, and then some of the western states are starting to set forward goals. We did have a bill out of the House that, because of COVID, did not continue about the Cal Lev standards, you know, whether we would adopt those. And there had been a lot of work and a lot of discussion on that. So I guess what I'm just trying to throw out there is this general area of state requirements, mandates, and so forth, or participation in these regional agreements. So I don't know what people thought that we might be recommending around any of those.
Senator, I'll just offer that I believe Representative McWilliams has put in an LSR for her Cal Lev bill again.
Yeah.
This session, I believe I already saw that.
Yep.
Yeah, that has been filed.
Yeah, and from just as a state agency, I personally have a lot of opinions, but I'm here representing a state agency, and as an agency person, state agencies are basically here to implement the policies that are developed by the legislature, and so I'm not going to be registering an opinion on what legislation should be filed telling us what to do. But
yeah, fair enough. And
certainly
that-
welcome guidance.
Actually, we had some conversation that when it comes to voting on these recommendations, we're not, because of what Becky has said, we're really not expecting the agency representatives here to make a vote on recommendation this or that, or potentially in the final report. But we'll deal with that next meeting. But I think it's just, you know, it's an important point to note at this time. But Dan, did you have something else?
No, that covered it. It was just that yesterday I saw that Representative McWilliams, just in title only, that her bill did pop up again. So.
And I will say that I am likely to reintroduce the bill that asks the state fleet to move in certain directions. And You know, I think that we had a very good process to put that bill together the last time. And I think as the price differential between these vehicles and the standard powered vehicles is getting smaller and may really be gone sooner rather than later. And with all the new models coming out, I think there might be, it might be useful to take another look at that and perhaps configure it that it is an understanding that if total cost of vehicle life is the consideration that could be used by agencies, that they would find some ways to, as appropriate, to purchase those vehicles. So that you know, that's one I'm likely to do, and you know, it would be nice to have included as a recommendation, or you know, a recommendation for consideration in the report. But again, that's just, it's up to the commission to decide what it wants. Other thoughts about particular legislative recommendations? And I will mention, you know, a lot of legislation is telling agencies to do this, that, and the other thing, and sometimes even paying for it. But you know, I do wonder, given the, you know, perennial understaffing of most of our state agencies, and in particular what's been revealed through the COVID experience, that you know, if we are going to task agencies with something, I think we are going to have to figure out a way that they have funding for that staffing, or potentially can use some funding that we're getting from federal sources or VW sources to do the work, or that we designate somebody else who does the work, but in cooperation with the agency. And that kind of gets back to the ideas we heard earlier about allowing some other entity to handle this. But, you know, of course, with government oversight or agency partnership or something. So,
Senator.
yes, Steve, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The directive for state agencies to go to electric vehicles, I think I've been misinterpreted a couple of times. So I thought this is a great room to just lay it straight out in. A straight up ban or directive, you all shall move to electric vehicles by date, whatever, I'd never support, because there's a lot of upfront work that needs to be done on that. What I would love to see, though, is it goes more to your comments about cost and viability. So when there's going to be some sort of turnover in the fleet, I don't think it's a ton of overhead to ask the state agencies to do a cost comparison, because it's going to vary widely by type of vehicle. If you're talking heavier vehicles that rely on power takeoffs, things like that, probably the tech isn't there now. Fleet vehicles, yeah, sure. So a recommendation that the state agencies do some sort of cost comparison between conventional, hybrid, and electric, or, you know, however, I'm not married to the details there, but to be mindful of it with a preference towards moving that way, that I would support.
Well, good point. Good point, Representative Smith, really, all around.
Senator, could I just add on to that, because we do work with the State Government Energy Committee, and part of that is looking at where do we set the sort of the recommended minimum fuel economy standards, particularly for the light duty fleet, is what we've been focusing on. And I totally agree that we should be looking at this as a total cost of ownership. I would say that we need to be very specific about over what time frame. Is it in the first 3 years of operation? Is it over a typical, you know, what is the typical lifespan? Because you come up with extremely different analyses if you choose, you know, it has to pay back for within 3 years versus, you know, I think typically state agencies keep a light duty passenger vehicle for about 8 years. And that's a much different payback calculation. The calculation is the same, the outcome is very different if you go over the true lifetime of the vehicle. So I know that we would certainly welcome having some good solid direction on here's what you need to do, and here's the parameters in which you need to do it. So thank you.
Of course, you know, I mean, this is what it's all about, is what can work and why is it a good thing to do, because we're not going to persuade our colleagues in the legislature to vote for something or the governor to sign it unless we've made the case in those ways. Let me throw another one out that I think actually Becky and I talked about yesterday. In that, you know, we're seeing a whole lot of state construction going on in liquor stores and in other areas. And it surprises me that these plans don't include electric vehicle charging stations. Solar on the roofs is a whole nother matter. Part of this might be something that gets addressed in capital budget, but that too is legislation, of course. So, you know, that is another area. And I know some states have mandated that if you have over a certain number of employees, you have to have EV charging stations, just the way we do now on parking lots with accessible and people with disabilities parking. So, you know, other states are doing those kinds of things too. I mean, I think there's a reluctance in this state to tell the private folks, private businesses what to do. Maybe it could be incentivized, but on the other hand, I think that if we are doing state construction of facilities that are heavily used by the public, why would, you know, we might consider legislatively mandating that there be charging stations there. So that's just another area I wanted to throw out. Yeah, Peter.
Gary LeMay. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, when you're building a building, it's a lot easier to make provisions, even to make it available for EV charging, never mind if you go through, but you know, to have a few extra circuits there, underground conduit. Yeah, so it's maybe that is something that should come out as a recommendation that, again, isn't a lot of money right up front, but gets them thinking about it when they're designing these facilities.
And you know, it's even something that could be tied to school construction aid. If we get back into that business, which I think is not unlikely that there will be school funding. But you know, just lots of areas, there are lots of areas like this where the state is providing or mandating certain kinds of construction, and they're already under mandates about what standard they're at for energy efficiency. And so this is not a whole lot different from that. And a lot of states are seeing it the same way. And Peter, I think you were next.
I did. I had a question. It kind of switches gears a little bit, but early in our process here, we spent a lot of time considering the merits of the high voltage DC charging versus level 2 charging and the pros and cons. And we went forward with the plan for the DC charging for a lot of good reasons. It's difficult to implement by the private sector is probably the number one, and it helps get it out there. But as an EV driver, I rely very heavily on level 2 chargers to get around. And I don't want the commission's mission or the message lost that we considered the high volt DC was the way to go initially, but we also had a plan that the second wave would be the level 2 chargers. And I don't want to lose it that's a big piece of this puzzle here that we never really got to, but they could certainly be put out on a massive scale compared to the level 2, compared to the high volt DC throughout the state. And I think it could be an easier implementation for sure than the high voltage, but I just want to make sure that that message is not lost in the summary of our committee here. Thanks.
Well, Peter, it sounds to me as if that is potentially something that could be in legislative policy language, but is also something to pass on to the Transportation Council very, very clearly, because you're absolutely right. And I know that the regional planning commissions are doing corridor studies, and one aspect of those corridor studies is going to be level 2 charging. So there's definitely a need for that. The DC fast charge made sense because it's the main, the major transportation routes. It connects us to other states, tourism, I mean, all those things. And so I think that's a very important focus. But given rural New Hampshire and our small communities and so forth, level 2s will work quite well for a lot of people. So Other thoughts about the legislative before we kind of segue into the budget?
Senator Waters, Gary LeMay again.
Gary, yeah.
I think Peter's point is a good one because I still believe, when we were talking the high voltage DC, at least, again, a year and a half ago, the utilities, when we were talking, we're looking at maybe a couple of million high voltage DC, maybe 2.5 towards that. But yes, we still thought there was a huge chunk, at least in my mind. I agree, level 2 needs to be in the mix, absolutely. And whether it's a 50-50 split or a little different, but that should not be forgotten because yes, that's a very practical and inexpensive way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's, if we could now shift to the budget and, I want to be kind of inclusive on this. There's obviously the general fund budget and state agency funding in that, but we also have the capital budget and, I think we might as well think of the 10-year highway plan as a budget bill as well. And I think that in each of those areas, there are opportunities here and here, even without crossing the electric fence line of making a recommendation, I hope that some of the state agency folks might help us understand, what kind of budget funding might be needed to actually make some of these things work. I mean, just one, for example, is that if we are going to task, procurement of the state fleet, or if we are going to do something like that, then we certainly have to look at budget for charging infrastructure for the state. Now that maybe that's a capital budget item, maybe it's another kind of item, but and staffing levels, and I suppose regulation and supervision, and just there's lots of things here that potentially we need to be thinking about. So at that, I'll just see what thoughts people have, and Matt too. You're the OSI. I think that becomes a place that's likely to continue with some of this work, but here you are on Gopher, and it's just we see. I think who knows what will happen, but I think we ought to be pretty open about what the implications are of revising the transportation system and some of these kinds of ways that might increase the demands on state agencies.
Senator Waters?
Sir?
Yes, Richard.
One of the things that I would just say, we're still early in the budget process, of course, but in the agencies that I've talked to, one of those things that is being looked at and trimmed in a lot of places are the fleet replacement plans. There certainly are best practices for mileage and age and things. But I think that you'll find as we go forward in this budget, there's going to be fewer cars and trucks replaced than we would normally do.
Matt, were you going to say something, or?
I was just going to add, Senator, that I think these are conversations worth having, and I think all the ideas thrown out so far at least warrant further conversation, and we're happy to be a part of that conversation as OSI.
Well, thank you. And, again, the recommendations are just kind of place markers in some ways, because, we just don't know the details and what budget prep and what's going to happen with the budget and these things. But I think that if the recommendations can be of a level on here that, recommending that there be consideration of budgetary needs for X, Y, and Z agencies for X, Y, and Z reasons, that would be useful, because anything that's in the recommendations, somebody can come and cherry pick later and say, well, this is something to follow up on. Or can say, well, it was in the report recommendation, so that gives some leverage for bringing something like this forward. Maybe this is one where we'll have to have some more discussion, and suggestions sent in emails prior to the next meeting. Heaven knows. Heaven knows what's going to happen with the budget, right? But there's no reason why we can't at least say what we think, and then, it'll be taken from there.
Mr. Chairman, this is David Rodriguez from DOT.
Yeah, David.
Hi, just a little insight, of course, for the next biennium. Our capital budget process starts in February and March. We've already completed our agency submissions, and they are significantly constricted with an eye on where we're at in reality with tax receipts and so forth. So those have already been put forward. I agree with you that there are opportunity from particular sources, including sources such as the CMAQ funds have been talked about already today. Those funds are there to help to reduce noxious chemicals in the air and improve air quality. And this is a great way to help do that. One of the things I want to just point out from an agency perspective, when we talk about making chargers available to the public through state installations and so forth, the operator and maintainer of that system is a key component to be considered. It does, I think that's something we saw with the RFPs that have been released, and the reason why they may have been difficult having that single owner, operator, and maintainer. But that's a burden we certainly do not want to, from an agency perspective, we do what's legislated, but that's a burden that I'm particularly concerned about being passed on to state agencies when we already are so shorthanded and have so much deferred maintenance in the infrastructure we've already purchased and are trying to keep up with.
Well, understood. And I think that as a philosophy of having private entities actually be responsible for those things once as this goes forward, I mean, that's part of the RFPs and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we can't burden the agencies with that. Becky, did you have something? Yeah.
Sorry, I covered over my unmute button. One of the, hold on, I just momentarily forgot what I was going to say. I'm searching for the mute button. It went right out of my head. I'll get back to it.
So you're going to wait for it to come back to your head?
Yeah, if somebody else has another thing to offer, it'll come back.
Okay, all right.
Oh, I know what it was. I know what it is. So we have already seen filed for, I believe, the 5th, maybe 6th year in a row, Representative Major's bill looking at increasing the registration fee for the more efficient vehicles and puts a flat fee on electric vehicles. And, from an agency perspective and looking at what's being done in other states, there is no reason that an electric vehicle should get, quote unquote, a free ride on the roads. Every vehicle should be paying their fair share. The one thing that might be considered under that bill or something like it is that whether or not any of those funds could go towards support of charging infrastructure. If there's going to be a flat fee associated with registering an electric vehicle, or whether it's, however it's done on an annual registration fee, is there any mechanism to use any of those funds to go towards charging infrastructure? And I believe that would require a statutory change, and that could potentially, and Dave Rodriguez could probably jump in, that could potentially run afoul of the state constitution. But which requires that any road toll be dedicated to the funding of the roads. But anyway, just, that bill is out there. It will be heard again this year. Again, like I said, for the 5th or 6th time. And that will have an impact on overall cost of EVs. Again, I think that most EV owners out there, if they had to pay an additional $100 or $100 registration fee, they're not paying gas tax all year. So it's really not an unfair fee. But.
Well, it's an interesting question. One can see the logic of it. Also, there is the constitutional issue, but if you're just trying to do a, shell game as to what we call it, and the funding goes to something that is unconstitutional, the courts won't like it. But there might be a way. There might be a way. I think that's a good one to put as a kind of a place marker for us for recommendations. And because I think you're right. I think EV drivers, have always balked at an enhanced registration fee or whatever it might be, or the vehicle miles traveled. But if there's a confidence that's dedicated to building up the system that they want to use, that might change the dialogue about that.
Yeah, just a little more insight on that bill. That's for all vehicles. I drive a Ford Fiesta that gets 38 to 40 miles a gallon, and I would pay an increased part of my registration fee based on that gas mileage efficiency that I choose to live within budget.
True enough. So we've kind of, in a way, already covered this, but are there anything that we have left out of potential actions by state government? We don't have a very strong executive order system here. So I don't think that's particularly relevant, but some other governors do. But in terms of, I guess, we have it on here, but I think it's kind of, we've talked about what agencies might need to do, but of course that would have to be directed by legislation and therefore done in rules. But it may be that here, as Becky was describing, or maybe it was Dave earlier about vehicle procurement, that there are ways even under existing practices that they could be encouraged to do certain things by the governor. But I don't know if anybody has more comment on this.
We do have, through the State Government Energy Committee, we do currently set a minimum or a recommended minimum fuel economy for state agency purchases for the light duty fleet. And if an agency requests a vehicle that doesn't meet that, they do have to get a waiver from Department of Administrative Services. We're trying to strengthen that this year and trying to revamp how we do the state bid for vehicles so that we're getting more bids on EVs, on highly efficient vehicles, because not only do state agencies buy off that, but all municipalities and nonprofits can buy off of the state contract as well. So we're working to try to make that better this year. But again, any sort of guidance to the agencies that continues to push us that way, because honestly, staff changes year to year. And so sometimes when staff leaves, that, what was the sort of the favorite project of one staff person might not, might get dropped if it's not, if they leave and it's not somewhere written down that you shall do this. So.
Well, I think this might be an interesting dual track with whatever I might introduce on the state fleet, because the recommendation could be just as you were describing, that the agencies make these efforts, and that doesn't really require legislation, and it would require department heads to, as Becky says, to if that is a desired goal, to actually follow up on it. But that is something that can be done without legislation, it seems to me. And then if we do some legislation on the state fleet and mileage standards or whatever, we'll fine. But Any others that seem to be?
I would say, this is David Rodriguez again. The other way to do it is to provide financial incentive. So why are we talking about all of this? We are talking about all of this because from a dollars and cents perspective, if we do not incentivize EVs at this time, the adoption may not grow as quickly. So what happens with any emerging technology like EVs is, while there's few users, it's very difficult to cost effectively install the infrastructure, such as charging stations and any utility infrastructure necessary to make it cost effective, because we don't have the volume. So one thing the commission could recommend is some sort of incentives, either for the private sectors to purchase EVs, or you can use the same for state agencies, so that maybe we do tip that cost benefit analysis, instead of forcing state agencies to adopt them, incentivizing state agencies to adopting them by taking a separate pot of funds and letting agencies compete for those to offset the additional vehicle cost. But that can also be done for the private sector as well. And the more vehicles on the road, the more efficient your charging network becomes.
Let's get it on the list. I have been giving some thoughts to this energy efficiency issues related to the capital budget and state buildings and construction. And that, we always end up with a big proposal from General Services about how much they want a year for energy efficiency work in their buildings. And we cut a lot of it, if not all of it, for various reasons, really just how the capital budget gets done. But, the way that is handled is that if that funding is there, then there is a kind of a competition for agencies to make proposals about how they'll use it for their buildings. And so that might be a way to put these two together, that there be a central amount of money in the capital budget where you could compete for, not just for building efficiency, but also for electric vehicle infrastructure and vehicles. And so I think what you mentioned, David, is there's some possibilities there. So good.
Along those lines, a bill was just passed in one of the recent omnibus bills that actually got through a recommendation from the State Government Energy Committee relative to energy use. And it basically said, let's provide an incentive for state agencies to do efficiency projects. And it allows the savings from doing an efficiency projects to either, I think some of it flows to the State Energy Efficiency Fund, where it becomes available for other projects, but I think some of it also remains in the agency budget for additional energy efficiency projects. And perhaps that model is something that could be looked at for vehicles too. So if you go, if the base vehicle is a 30 mile per gallon four-door sedan and an agency goes out and buys a 45 mile per gallon, calculate that out based on the miles per year, and that extra savings stays in the agency budget to be used for future efficient vehicle purchases. So like I said, this is just gone through for state agency energy usage. Yeah.
Well, terrific idea. Let's put it on the list. Other thoughts? Okay, so on the agenda, related to this is existing committees, commissions can or should take on this topic. And we've had some discussion about the Transportation Council, and I think that's pretty clear. That's the main place that kind of looking at the higher level of it. And then Obviously, the House and Senate committees will be looking at these things, so I don't know if we can say anything about that. And I mean, I don't know whether we need to explicitly say anything. Well, maybe we could explicitly say that the fleet managers and so on and so forth, that we could have a place mark. I mean, we could have a recommendation that they consider the recommendations and implement as they can, ones that are feasible for them, so that at least it's kind of providing an area within state government, some particular areas that might look at these findings and recommendations. So any other kind of thoughts about that topic?
Senator Waters, I don't know if this applies or where it fits, but I mean, I definitely want to see something continue to get this done. And I don't know, the state agencies got their issues with budgets. I totally understand, and personnel. I don't remember, I haven't looked at our legislation lately to know how much we need to recommend for all of them in there. I think the comments that have been made are all good. But, the PUC right now has this, for the renewable portfolio funds, so much money goes out to incentives. There's solar ones, there's wood ones, there's a few others. And then there's like an RFP process a couple of times a year where, anybody can submit a bid, and if accepted, the money gets spent on it. I'm not sure who to administer it. I'm thinking out loud to the whole group right now, but I want to see money get out the door for EV infrastructure. That's why I'm here. That's why I spent 2 years in this group. And I understand the constraints of the state and all that, but you know what? I want to see something happen. So maybe sort of mandate or legislation that says $100,000 minimum has to go out the door to entities that want to put in level 2 charging or high voltage DC, something along those lines. I guess I haven't put all my, my thoughts around it, but absolutely mandate without 10,000 requirements that make it too onerous for people to do. I mean, I'll be honest, if you gave, like we were talking at one point, I thought 50,000 for a high voltage DC charger at various locations, without the 5-year mandate of maintenance, upkeep, and ownership, I think you would have seen some bids. And I guess you're the legislators, you and the others that are legislators. I'm not really that patient to be one at this point. If there's a way that we could get something put together that gets money out the door, that's what this whole thing's about. I don't want to go 10 years and I still have $4.5 million sitting in a fund with, interest. That hasn't done any good. EVs are coming faster than anybody thought. And New Hampshire is behind. There's no doubt. Our donor hole has gotten bigger in the last 2 years, not smaller. So anything that anybody can think of, but I'd say make a mandate. If you haven't spent it out of those state agencies, meaning OSI and DES, because they're responsible right now, $100,000, $200,000, $250,000 has to go out the door this year. It may not be the best project. It may not be the one that has met, 99% of all these requirements. But if somebody submitted an opportunity, a bid or RFP, again, I think you know what I'm talking about with the Public Utilities Commission doing in the electric side, the RFPs for the special projects, putting some wood burner, at schools that did solar panels, like at the Plymouth sewer treatment plant. Those are just RFP projects because to get the money out the door. So that's my brain cramp and my brain blast. I'll be quiet now.
Gary, this is Matt. Just a couple of quick thoughts on that. And, I don't need to go too far down the rabbit hole, but the Renewable Energy Fund, of course, is a state program. The state has control over those terms. The dollars come from alternative compliance payments. that are derived from coming short on renewable portfolio standard goals. The VW settlement is an entirely different animal, right? We're bound by settlement agreements that were approved by a court and apply to all 50 states. And you know, we just don't have the same degree of flexibility. Your point's well taken. You know, we would have loved to see more money get out the door by this point in time, but we can't violate the terms of the trust. And if we do, that money would be recouped and the state would be in a much worse position overall. So again, I hear you. You know, I don't think anyone's happy about where we are, but we do have to be cautious and not run afoul of the law, or the settlement rather.
Matt, thank you, but Maine got the money out the door, Mass got the money out the door, Vermont's got the money out the door. You know, we're supposed to be the live free or die state, but we haven't got a dime out the door. So I understand the constraints. Nobody wants to go to jail. Nobody wants to pay money back. I totally understand. And I agree with you totally on that. So let's find.
Gary, you know, even for a patient legislator, we get frustrated too sometimes, but, you know, there we are. I do think your suggestion about looking at the PUC process and the inclusion of EV is an interesting one to go. And let's put that on the list. And Representative Smith, did you have another comment?
No. There's my microphone. No, actually, I was going to comment on Representative Major's bill, but I can probably take that up with you afterwards. There was some specific issues with it that involve minutia that the commission might not be interested in.
Yeah, well, that bill will go its rounds again, and we shall see. Okay, so I think that in terms of under that number 5 there, existing committees or commissions, that Gary's comment about looking at the PUC process and the definition there of potentially including EV projects is one that we could look at as well. Yeah, Becky, another?
I'm just wondering if, is there any legislation needed to direct these other existing commissions? I think we're particularly looking at the Transportation Council. Is anything needed to get them to take these issues up, or do you think that it falls under their existing purview and that will just be done because they've got an interest in this issue and will realize that it's important?
Yeah, I think that there may, for the Transportation Council, if we wanted to make it explicit. I've had some communication with Senator LeVake about that council, and I mean, she had been interested potentially in meeting with us, having that council meet with us and discuss things about our recommendations now. And I said, you know, really, I think it makes most sense for us to do a report. Then after we've done the report, to then talk with that council, and maybe I could go present the report to it, or Representative Smith and I could go present the report to it, and fine. But I'll look at the Transportation Council language. I think it's pretty broad, but it might make sense to amend that statute to say that this is explicitly under your purview. And Representative Smith, just a question too, is that there's just so much blending and synergy between what the advances in electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, that, you know, the new lines of electric vehicles tend to have a whole lot of enhanced packaging that's autonomous or near autonomous. So I just don't know whether it would make sense in our recommendation to other commissions to recommend that, you know, that commission consider electric vehicle infrastructure issues as well, or not.
I don't think so, because the nearest company that we have operating and testing over the border in Massachusetts are using hybrids, and there's a couple of companies that are actually using conventional gas. So there's not a real overlap in that. They're kind of fuel agnostic in the system. So I'm not sure the expertise would be with that group.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention it in when you read the industry reports about what vehicles they're bringing forward, and it's always mentioned in tandem. So, but fair enough. So any other comments in this discussion? It gives Becky and I a lot to work with, but please, and I think we'll send an email out to the commission members who could not join us today to ask that really as soon as possible that they follow up, that you all follow up and they follow up with emails to Jen Gallagher, so that when Becky and I and anybody else who wants to sits down to kind of look at where we're at on the recommendations, we have everything that you want us to consider. And I think what we'll do is we'll bring in a draft report with a whole slew of draft recommendations, and then we'll just kind of look at them and see what's ready for prime time or what we have some consensus on, and take it from there. So thank you for this great conversation. I don't particularly have a legislative update other than what we've heard about some bills have gone in. The Senate doesn't file until December, and then the House filing period will open up again after the election. So I don't know if there's a lot more to report on legislation at this point, but Representative Smith, any further thoughts on that, or just we'll see what comes over the hopper when filing period opens up again?
Well, I guess I will comment on Representative Major's bill then.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges with it is I think everybody agrees that EVs need to pay the road toll because that's just how it works, how you finance the road maintenance. His recommendation, though, only hits New Hampshire vehicles. There are a couple of proposals. One was come up with a per mileage fee and you pay it at inspection because we track mileage at inspection, but it ignores how the New Hampshire economy works. We want tourists, people that don't live here, to pay to fix our roads. So one of the things that we might consider is a fee on public charging stations. That's how they pay the road toll. I don't have any clue how you would quantify it at this point, but if you could make a case that a certain number of tourists and EVs would pay a certain amount of money, that might help the whole conversation. So anyway, I'm talking to a couple of people smarter than I about how to come up with a formula like that or a plan that would work, and then even see if the data is available. I'm not sure that it is, but that's the key problem for a lot of us with Norm's bill. We agree with the concept, but we don't agree with the implementation of it. And I'm trying to work on that. If I get it done in time for the filing period, or think that I'm close enough, I'll file a bill in so maybe we can fix it up with amendments by the time it gets to you. Gives us a few months to play with, assuming I'm back, of course. But but anyway, that's what I'm working on there. It's important. It needs to be done, and it might also dovetail back into the conversation about having a fee to support infrastructure. You might be able to divide that up. Some goes to the highway fund, which some of us in private circles call Don Corleone because he always gets a slice. It doesn't matter what you're passing. And but then divert a part off for increased infrastructure. So that's what's in my hopper. I don't know if I'll be successful, but I'm trying.
Very good. And Becky, you want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you for that, Representative Smith, because that's actually always been one of my concerns with that bill as well. I guess the one thing that I would just throw out there for thinking about is that we have, as Gary calls them, we've got a lot of dumb chargers out there right now, and there's no way that the charger itself is metering the kilowatt hours that are going into any given vehicle, and also not by not being connected to the internet and to some sort of service network. It would be interesting to figure out how to collect that charge. So I just wanted to throw that out there so that you're thinking about that as you move forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so you were reading my mind on that. And the couple of options is it's frustration notwithstanding, it's a good thing that we don't have a ton of them out there yet, because if the answer is that we can make new ones that are installed solve that problem, and there aren't a lot of old ones, maybe we just don't worry about that. So yeah, a lot of irons in the fire on that one.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. It really is. I've wondered about that, you know, whether it might be a way of dealing with the issue. And, you know, we have a differential charge on the Easy Pass, right? So maybe you stick your plate number in on the charging station. If it's a New Hampshire plate, you get charged one rate. If it's an out-of-state plate, you get charged another rate. You know,
I like that.
I don't know. I mean, there's ways to do it.
I got my head handed to me when I proposed having the 2 state rates at the regular drive-through tolls that we already have. I mean, other states do this, and it generates a ton of revenue, and nobody cares. But I immediately got hit with, well, you can't treat different classes of people differently. I don't really think that applies, and Rhode Island's been successful
on our roads, and we're maintaining it. You ought to pay for it.
Exactly. So let's see if we can work.
Let me just mention in some conversation with on a phone call about the TCI states, you know, down in Maine now, including down to Virginia, that they started to kvetch about. The person in Massachusetts, of course, started to say, well, if we do TCI and, you know, we're doing that and Governor Baker wants to do it and he has the authority to do it, then all those hundreds of thousands of people who commute to Massachusetts from New Hampshire, and they're not going to be paying for the TCI extra costs. And so I said, well, you could always put toll booths on I-93 and Route 3 coming into the state and 95. And I don't think that's going to happen. But I mean, it's just interesting. I mean, people, there's a lot of, I mean, I think those are kind of sideshows in a way, but I think there is a real question with any of these things. You start moving to TCI or to road miles traveled, is, you know, what revenue are you capturing and how, and what's fair. So, any other legislative comments? And if I just may, I've been doing this in most of my committees and commissions lately. There's discussion among leadership in both bodies and both parties about how we're going to be able to legislate when the next session starts. The Senate is able to do what we need to do with our committees. Probably the capacity is probably there, although I do think we need more staff. But in terms of the platform, I think it's obviously much more difficult for the House and its committees, and then also House sessions are much more problematic. And so part of the discussion becomes, what can we do to reduce the number of bills? And there are a lot of things under discussion, like having a super rules committee combines to both bodies, which decide which bills come in, or making rules about that, or perhaps we have various omnibuses, like committee omnibuses, and maybe you have joint hearings between the House and the Senate, so you're just having one hearing, and then each body would do its own executing and so forth, and voting on it. But there's just going to be a lot of pressure on these things, and so I think that you know, it does help to think about, rather than lots of little discrete bills, can you put a package together? And for our purposes, you know, the issue becomes, you start putting packages together, is there a poison pill in there, or is there something that, you know, everybody in the interest groups and the agencies agree 90%, but there's one piece of it they don't? What do you do at that point? And then the governor's view of it as well. So, you know, and the message to the agencies is going to be, we're not going to be able to do the 5 or 6 or 7 or so little discrete bills that come to committees from agencies. It just, I don't think we're going to be able to do that in the same way. So there's, I mean, we're just probably not going to know for another month or two just when it's going to be done, but things are going to be different. Also, there's going to be very, 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 very little appetite for commissions or study committees at all, doing any of those moving forward. So that may affect, you know, that's one of the reasons why there's more pressure on actually legislating this time than saying we ought to look at something. So I just thought I'd mention that. So any other comments before we go to public comment? So I would just say that we will have our next meeting as it is scheduled, and we hope that we will have to you materials to look at and that we will wrap up at that time. And so, Alan, if we have any members of the public, you could open up and if you would take their comments and
If
questions.
there are members, attendees right now, you can raise your hand. And if you're on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. Looks like we have Barry Woods who'd like to talk. I'm gonna let him in. Barry, can you hear us?
Yes, that's a dangerous thing, unmuting me. Feel free to mute me if you don't like what I'm saying. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee, and I just wanted to kind of go through a short list of some of the recommendations that if I were in your position, I would make, and I'll send you, a more formal type of notice and probably flesh these out further, just to the extent that it's something you guys might consider. And I want to, first of all, just thank everybody for the work over the past couple of years. It has not been for naught, certainly. There's been, I think, a great opportunity to educate you as lawmakers and other stakeholders, as well as the public. So I think this has been I think you've laid a really good foundation, going forward here for the state. In fact, one of my recommendations would be to see if you couldn't somehow get additional legislative executive authority to extend, your tenure, because it's always, I think, somewhat discouraging to me to get a group of educated individuals and have to break apart, and when the work is still needing to be done, and that I think slows things down further. So that might be that's one of my comments. I was going to just say real quick, that this is going to happen whether New Hampshire is fully or partially behind it. And by this, I mean transportation electrification. And I have no doubt that everybody in the committee is behind this notion of this technology at some level and wanting to see it successful. I think New Hampshire, and I don't mean this to be critical, but I think it's factual. I think New Hampshire is now sort of an island unto itself as compared to the rest of New England when it comes to charging infrastructure, except perhaps with the exception of the Tesla supercharging. And that is disappointing because this is going to happen, and if New Hampshire is not in a position to grow along with the rest of New England in providing these types of resources, and I think it's going to impact the economy and people's view of the state at some level. That's not what I'm hoping for, certainly, but I do think that is a factual recitation of where we find New Hampshire right now. It should motivate all of us, and to do is to keep the momentum up and to be strong-willed as possible. I also think states do what they. A wise man told me people do what they want to do, and I think sometimes I think that's true with states at some level of authority. And I think bandwidth issue brought on by COVID is real. I also believe that if this was a priority, then it would get the priority that it needs. And for whatever reason, it hasn't. And that's disappointing, especially with the funds that are available and need to be spent. So I side with Gary LeMay, I think, in wanting to get projects in the ground. And I don't think this requires overriding the judicial settlement. I think it requires not letting perfection be the enemy of the good. And just come up with some RFPs, like many states have been able to do, get the money moving and to get your experience level going. So that's I think broader context. I think we had two momentous news releases this last week, one of which was Tesla that's revealed that a battery improvement is going to bring the cost of these cars down, be very competitive with combustion engine vehicles. And the other is the state of California, saying they're going to ban the sale of combustion engine vehicles by 2035, which, by the way, China did a year ago. So the notion that this isn't going to happen and that New Hampshire needs to take its time, I think needs to be thought through very carefully in terms of the long-term impact. So before you mute me, I'm going to just go through a couple quick recommendations that I think you should consider. And I do think you should consider additional staff resources to warrant the level of priority that this topic area requires. to include agency mandates to collect more data about EV drivers, not only state residents, but the tourist market. I think utility make-ready pilots ought to be something the PUC gets directed legislatively to undertake, like Massachusetts and Maine have done, and Vermont, help get the utilities more seriously engaged in terms of deploying different types of financing and ownership models for the state. That's both level 2 and DC fast charging, but I think the DC fast charging is particularly critical. I think the state ought to review the ZEV MOU and seriously consider becoming a ZEV state like the rest of New Hampshire, because it's hamstringing your dealerships. And I think consumer education ought to be part of the recommendation of the committee, similar perhaps to some of the efforts that we see in other states to fund independent stakeholder groups like Drive Electric Vermont, Drive Electric Maine, which become natural channels for disseminating, information and to further the discussion. So I think there's a lot that this committee can do going forward. I think you guys have a lot of talent and I think you have a lot of drive to see this done. I urge you to take a breath and not accept, slow walking these, the funding from the VW settlement any further, because, you're empowered to push this topic area, and I would urge you to do that. And I appreciate your efforts in that direction. And at any rate, I'll submit additional recommendations to the committee prior to the final meeting. But I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and I want to thank each of you for your time and consideration on this topic.
Well, Barry, thank you very much. And, your comments are going to be part of what we look at, and please send more. But also, I just wanted to thank you for all your help and guidance of, even before this process started, and certainly throughout it. And your expertise has been invaluable. Alan, somebody next?
That right now appears to be it for public comment. Anybody else interested in speaking, please raise your hand. And if you're on the phone, press *9. It looks like that's it, Senator.
Well, thank you, everybody. Great meeting, got a lot done, and onward. And I think we're going to come up with some very good recommendations, and we're going to have some very energetic legislators who I think are going to try to implement and put some bills together, do the work that needs to be done. So thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend, and we will see you at our final meeting October 23rd. So
you just got to do the
Alan, thanks, Becky.
You
Bye-bye. Oh, we're going to vote to adjourn. I'm sorry, excuse me. I move that we adjourn. There's a second?
David Rodriguez.
Second. Dave's got it. Okay.
And Becky, if you'd call the roll, please.
Yes, Senator Waters.
Yes.
Representative Smith.
Yes.
Matt Mayu.
Yes.
Richard Bailey.
Yes.
Kevin Bowen.
Yes.
Pete King.
Yes.
Gary LeMay.
Yes.
Kevin Miller. Kevin Miller.
Looks like
Like
he's
he
gone.
dropped off.
Okay, Dave Rodriguez.
Yeah.
I vote yes. Dan Bennett
Yes.
and Carlton Simpson.
Yes.
Just think if we didn't vote to adjourn, we'd be in Zoom limbo or Zoom purgatory for 4 weeks. Thank you, everybody.
Maybe we do that on our final meeting and we never adjourn. We'll just, we'll just keep going.